Hi, folks. The purpose of this video will be to run through the week 11 material. Again, there's a couple reasons why we're doing this. One is that it just gives you a record of kind of my commentary on what we're doing for you to look back on as you are working through your How Do I Language project part two. Again, the explanation for that and the breakdown of that and so on is in the week 9 folder, as well as the video overview for that. If you did not attend class week 9. Um, Also, weeks 10 and 11, I will likely be recovering from surgery. Um, so these videos are there to assist you in going through and completing your assignments and submitting them in a timely manner so that you don't fall behind. Again, our sort of timetable that we're looking at is that the second part to the How Language is Judged assignment um, is due week 12, right? So we're looking at about a month window of completing this. And the material for week 11 specifically really delves into that question um, um, proposed in option one with regard to should students be allowed to use any language or any version or combination of code meshing in the classroom, right? And so these writings really delve into that. There's two that really um, make a case against universal allowance of code meshing. And then there's one article that um, comes up in defense of code meshing. So I'll take a little bit of time um, to kind of run through some of those ideas with you. Um, so let me go ahead and screen share. All right. Hopefully you all are seeing my screen. Um, so this is the week 11 material. Um, and I'm doing this on a double screen, so I don't know how it's going to look in the final video, but you can always follow along with this on your Blackboard, right, on our course Blackboard site. So looking at the week 11 material, um, first of all, your assignments that are due for the week are very straightforward. It's your week 11 labor log and your week 11 writing tasks. And the writing tasks for week 11 um, center around a series of questions about your audience, right? And how you anticipate your audience responding to your text that you're preparing, right? So again, as I said, the first round with How Language is Judged Part One, um, these questions about your audience really should the way that you answer these questions about your audience really should have an impact in the ultimate medium through which you're presenting your project, right? So if your audience is more apt to respond to a traditional essay, create a traditional essay. If your audience is more apt to respond to a short video, right? Create a short video and et cetera, et cetera. Now, that being said, we are um, working up against a pretty tight deadline. Uh, and after the fact, right, after week 12, we essentially have 3 weeks to revise, work. So um, So your form that you submit for your project may not be the final form, right? You can um, revise your project for your final folio, and in so doing, you may present it in an entirely different form. Okay, but as you are delving into um, who your audience is and what your purpose is in addressing that audience, like why are you talking to them? What do you want to convey to them? What linguistic choices linguistic and rhetorical choices are you making that you anticipate will impact them? Um, okay. And how successful is that process so far, right? As you delve into that, right, and as you think about that, and as you evaluate your project after the fact, right, you may choose to make some significant changes, like the medium of your project, certain um, ways of communicating, certain use of certain language, etc., and so on, right? You may choose to make those changes. Um, and that's fine to do after the fact. Okay. Remember that your project is assessed by completeness in terms of completeness based solely on the three criteria given for the option that you choose, right? So that's what I'm going to use to assess completeness. Anything um, beyond that can be addressed after the fact. Okay, so let's move into looking at thinking about talking about the readings. So I'll talk about Ryan Bloom first. Um, so his assertion is, as the title suggests, inescapably, you're judged by your language. And he talks about um, language in different contexts, right? So he talks about, one might be assessed a certain way negatively, for example, for using um, quote unquote standard non-standard English or code meshing, if you will, in an academic or professional context. Often that happens, right? So he talks about that, but he also does talk about that if you were to use quote unquote standard English at a bar, if you were just to walk in and say the example from the essay is, for which team are we rooting, right? If you were just to walk in and say that, people might stare you down, right? Uh, what what is this person talking about? Is this person making fun of us? Is this, so on, right? So um, not all language is appropriate in every context, but he um, points out that I believe it's Bloom. It may be maybe Jenkins, but I believe it's Bloom. Points out that the real reason that we that students, right, should endeavor to master standard English is that folks in power trade in standard English, right? Speak standard English. And thereby, if you want to um, garner that power to various degrees, um, you know, you want to be able to communicate in that language. Now, that's his logic there, and that's going to be picked up by Rob Jenkins, right? And his appeal is much more direct and much stronger. Um, however, just um, allowing for a moment Vereshana Shanti Young to respond to someone like Bloom and Jenkins with regard to the assertion that because one is the relationship of power is quote unquote standard English or what is perceived as standard English, thereby uh, it should be universally taught, right? He argues, and his piece is written in code meshing, right? He code meshes all over the place in that piece. But he argues that um, the language of power, if you will, is not necessarily um, exclusively standard English any longer. And he talks about a Republican senator um, uh, tweeting um, President Obama um, using non-standard English. Um, and so uh, when you have, folks who uh, who are in power using phrases like punked, for example, is what he brings up. He's essentially asking Obama, calling Obama to task and saying, are you punking us, basically? Punking us as in the nation, right? And granted, excuse me, um, Ashanti Young's article is written in 2010, and so Obama would have been uh, president at that time, and so in um, prevalent in folks' consciousness, right? So, um, the senator essentially is asking, is Obama in fact punking the nation? Right? It's this thing. But the fact that a senator and a Republican senator at that would, use the phrase punked, use the term punked and so forth and address him as Pres Obama, right, instead of president, right, would suggest that um, that standard English isn't necessarily exclusively the language of power any longer. Now, one can read into that in various different ways. Is the non-standard English being used there because President Obama was African American? Is it a uh, statement about something like that? I don't know, but that could definitely, people could definitely read in that way. I don't know whether or not the senator who is speaking is African American or not. Right? I think I he might be, right, and I think I remember maybe reading that. But anyway, the the but so there's all of that. In other words, had it been a white sitting president, would a senator address uh, the president put on a public forum like that, especially in non-standard English? I don't know. Okay. But Young points out that, that's an example of folks in power publicly communicating in non-standard English. Um, Now, let's consider um, Rob Jenkins, right? So Jenkins argues very much for the teaching of standard English. But he does point out that what standard English is has evolved, right? Standard English is not the same as it was in 1850. It's not the same as it was in 1950, right? But there is, he says, still a standard. And what he's talking about with standard is he's basically talking about what used to be referred to as business class, right? So what's now on airlines and so forth, there was a what's now called first class, where you pay the big price, and you go in and you get the unlimited liquor, and the nice chairs that lean back and all that stuff, the right. And you get better food and whatnot. That used to be called business class, and there was a expression, right? Keep it business class, meaning that everyone's diction, right, speech, the subject matter that one would speak about, and so forth would be within this realm, right? Uh, and so that's what he's talking about, right? That whatever the business class is, right, for the given era, that he's saying is essentially standard English. Um, such that, and he gives an example of getting receiving an email from an insurance rep that has emojis in it, has text abbreviations like LOL and stuff like that in the body of the email, um, which uh, um, Jenkins considers to be extremely, unprofessional, right? Um, and so that's the kind of infraction, if you will, that he is advocating against, right? That there should be some kind of standard, and he points to um, the fact that he says the fact that and he does rightfully say that just because one can communicate in standard English does not mean that one is going to be successful. Does not in and of itself mean that one is going to be successful professionally. What he does say is that that is going to increase the probability of one's being successful professionally, but it doesn't guarantee it. Um, I will say that um, having taught what's called business communication, sometimes in some ways it's related to technical writing as well. Uh, but um, basically, major companies, right? And I may have mentioned this in class. I know I mentioned it in 1301 that major companies, schools and so forth, survey major companies, right? And ask what is it that you want incoming employees to be able to do, right? And the response is very surprising, right? So your major like Fortune 500 companies, et cetera, and so on, right? They say that what they expect, what they want their incoming employees to do is one, show up on time, right? And um and two, have a work ethic, right? Um and three, and this is interesting, um, is to be able to speak and write effectively in English, right? So that is pretty telling because I can almost guarantee you that when they are saying that, when they say speak and write in effectively in English, they're not they're not talking about or referring to code meshing, right? They're clearly they're talking about code switching, right? They're talking about prescriptive English, right? Remember uh, the distinction between prescriptive and descriptive. Uh, Prescriptive is sort of the rule governed English, versus descriptive being essentially literally a description of how one speaks. So it's not really about rule governance per se. It's about describing the language as spoken versus prescriptive, which is okay, there are sort of boundaries and um, purviews that that prescribe what acceptable English is, right? So, but I can almost guarantee you that when these companies are speaking thusly, they are talking about this prescriptive English, right? And so um, that's really what um, Rob Jenkins is speaking to. Um, I'll have to say, and I have to say that personally, I tend to be on the fence in this whole debate because the on the one hand, the freedom to access and use everything within one's language toolbox is liberating, right? Uh, and it can free. one up to, um, we see this often in 1301 when when students have the permission to essentially write how they write, and they may have never been given that permission before. They tend to open up, right, and create stuff that they wouldn't have created otherwise, and to develop sort of stronger writing habits, etc., and so on, a lot more confidence, a lot more grit, as it were, stick-to-itiveness with writing. Um, However, there is the reality of the socio-political climate that we live in. There is the reality of how, to what degree one's uh, ability to code switch into different um, modes of writing and speaking and so forth, uh, into how solvent that makes one in the workforce, right? Uh, and so that that's it's a reality, and for me personally, I feel that this course does address that and does address the potential importance of standard English, etc., and what is to be gained and or lost by embracing it to various degrees. This unit, right, this project really is delving into that. And ultimately, you know, you as students, you as scholars, um, will come to your own decision about it, right? Come to your own decision um, about um, about what that means for you, what that looks like, etc. I do think that particularly the option number two for uh, for your How Language is Judged Part Two, I think that really delves into this question within the context of your given fields of study, right? Because you're learning, you're delving into, you're researching how um, folks communicate in your discipline and what's expected of you, right? I can tell you um, from practical experience that often, not in every field, of course, but sometimes what's conveyed in the classroom is not um, what's necessarily conveyed in the world. Um, for example, and this is not maybe not the best example, but I was hospitalized back in um, 2019 uh, for about a week. And uh, then one of the night nurses that I had, a really nice guy, and I can't even remember the word that I used, but it wasn't like a uh, five syllable word or something, but I used a word, and this guy had no clue what I was saying, right? And I don't feel that my English, I mean, by comparison to a lot of folks that I've encountered, I don't feel like my English is all that erudite, right? I don't think it's, all that elevated. But I had said used some term and he had no clue what it meant. And so, and I've been using the practical medical field as an example. I've been um, in and out of a lot of emergency rooms recently and hospitals and listened to folks speak, and they're not, and they're on the job and they're doing their jobs, right? But they are not speaking standard English, right? Um, they they're definitely code meshing, um, and that goes for uh, the Caucasian nurse who's speaking a form of South Midland, i.e., quote unquote redneck English, to you know people of various Hispanic descents who are interspersing Spanish and other, meshing Spanish and other things, right? To actually the person with the most standard English, the last time I was in the hospital, was actually a guy from the Caribbean, right? Who actually was actually he was from London, but his parents were from the Caribbean, and he spoke with a little bit of a Caribbean accent. But he had also lived in Canada, and then came to the U.S. So his English was the closest to standard, honestly. This is a man of African Caribbean descent. Um, but and then of course the surgeon. Yeah, but anyway, the surgeon is actually um, of Indian and Pakistani American uh, descent, but impeccable English. Uh, anyway, so my point is that even when putting forth um, a standard for English in the classroom, oftentimes in practice, as one is doing the grit, the work, right, the work of whatever their profession is, that standard English isn't always employed. Now, again, though, to defend Jenkins, I mean, I don't mean to say defend them, but another point is that if someone, for example, if someone is a nurse and someone cannot chart effectively, cannot like um, record uh, data and reports and so forth, um, and chart them in such a way, and communicate and have the um, language tools to communicate that in such a way that is understood universally by their colleagues, right? That's a problem, right? That's actually a professional hazard. So, again, uh, there's again varying standards. Maybe this standard is for that field. What goes down on the page is more important in terms of standards than what's spoken. It may well be, right? Um, for example, uh, uh, there's an article that came out in the 90s, and I cannot place the author of this, but the example was an African American gentleman who, was in a Shakespeare class, and when he spoke in class, he spoke in African American vernacular English, just like, he probably spoke in his neighborhood, right? But his essays were beautifully rendered in what we would call standard English, right? To the standard of um, academic professionals. And that's something that Ashanti Young points out, um, that you know, or not, it was not Ashanti Young, or no, yeah. He points out that people, or no, it's Jenkins that points this out. Jenkins says, uh, you know, language theorists and writing instructors and so on and forth can talk about the advantages of code meshing, code switching versus code switching, and so on. But the bottom line is that typically in their own writing for professional journals and stuff that they don't do that, right? That they write in varying forms of quote unquote standard English, right? That the people that are advocating for code meshing are not in fact doing it on a professional level. And so now uh Bershwan Ashanti Young counters that, right? He counters that in a big way by essentially writing an entirely code meshed piece in response to Stanley Fish. Right? Stanley Fish, you'll remember from some of the articles we read for week 10, uh, um, where Fish is advocating for strongly. I mean, we're not reading a Stanley Fish article, but we read folks that reference Stanley Fish, where Stanley Fish is advocating strongly for the teaching of standard English. Um, and you're of course welcome to look up Stanley Fish's work and to even quote him in your work if you're arguing either for or against um, code meshing, right? In your project, if you're doing option one, if you're writing for the um, standard English, the teaching of standard English, you can use them to support your arguments. Um, if you're writing against, you can counter what he's saying. Because remember, one aspect of your project, one of those 3 points, if you're doing option one, needs to be some kind of addressing of uh, an opposition, right? So, but I do think, Dr. Gage has provided us with a fairly representative set of articles, you know, um, to delve into to really get the sense of the various ideas that are out there and within this discourse. And again, um, I advocate for you to research beyond that, be it as a part of your writing tasks, be it as a part of your um, development of your piece, right? Development of your project. Um, and I hope to on the second day of week 9, my hope is to spend a little bit of time um, going through some of the library databases and kind of helping you navigate through that. Okay. Um, anyway, this is our week 11 video. Again, we may be back in the classroom by now, by the time it's actually week 11. We realistically may not be. Again, I won't know until I wake up from surgery. Okay. So we will, but unless something really goes wrong, we should be back in the classroom by beginning of week 12. So I should be there unless something unforeseen happens uh, to help you shore up your projects, right? Um, okay. Again, please continue to submit your work. Um, and if you have any questions, you can send me an email. I may be slightly delayed in returning them, but I will do that. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. And of course, on this computer, I cannot find my cursor. All right. All right. Bye, y'all. See you soon.